The Hebrews. The Old Testament tells the story of the Hebrews or Israelites. The Hebrews trace their origins to the biblical figure Abraham, a man who migrated from the Mesopotamian city of Ur to Canaan, near modern-day Palestine, around the 20th century BC. The book of Genesis depicts Abraham's journey as a sacred mission. Abraham would be the father of a new nation. Although his native Mesopotamia was polytheistic, Abraham swore allegiance to only one God, identified in the Old Testament as Yahweh. In return for Abraham's obedience and loyalty, Yahweh promised to protect and guide Abraham and his descendants. Abraham's descendants eventually settled in Canaan. They prospered for a while, but their lives were disrupted when a severe drought brought famine to the area around 1600 BC. Desperate, they fled to nearby Egypt and settled east of the Nile Delta in Goshen. Life in Egypt was pleasant enough for a while, but the Hebrews' circumstances soon changed. Egypt's ambitious building projects required cheap mass labor. To fill this need, the unscrupulous Pharaoh enslaved the Hebrews and forced them to work on Egypt's great monuments. The Hebrews endured about 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Then their God Yahweh intervened. Yahweh appeared to Moses in the form of a burning bush. He commanded Moses to lead the Hebrews to freedom. When Moses approached the Pharaoh with this demand, the Egyptian leader was unmoved. Yahweh was, after all, the God of an enslaved people. Yahweh then sent a series of plagues down on Egypt. The waters of the Nile turned red, swarms of locusts devoured Egyptian crops. The Pharaoh still refused to let the Hebrews go. Then Yahweh sent his worst plague of all. The angel of death visited every Egyptian household and killed the firstborn son. The night before the visitation, each Hebrew household was instructed to slaughter a lamb and mark their homes with the animal's blood. This was a signal to the angel of death, who then passed over the homes of the Hebrews. This event is celebrated each year in the Jewish feast of Passover. The Pharaoh had finally had enough. Convinced of Yahweh's greatness, he agreed to let the Hebrews leave Egypt. However, he reneged shortly after they departed and sent an army to intercept them. Once again, Yahweh intervened on the Israelites' behalf. When the Hebrews reached the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea, which is a common mistranslation, Yahweh parted the waters so they could cross. When the Pharaoh's army tried to pass, he released the waters, killing all the Egyptians. This series of events is known in the Old Testament as the Exodus. Scholars, of course, debate how many of these events are historical fact and how many are merely legends. The biblical accounts of Abraham's migration to Canaan, Hebrew slavery in Egypt, and the Exodus were written down centuries after the events were supposed to have occurred. While the existence of specific Old Testament figures is difficult to verify, there is some corroborating archaeological evidence that suggests a mass migration of Hebrew tribes from Egypt to Palestine around 1200 BC. The Old Testament reports that the Hebrews lived on the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. They were organized in a loose confederation of 12 tribes. Tradition held that each tribe was descended from a great-grandson of Abraham. During these years in the desert, Yahweh watched over the Hebrews and have even fed them with manna from heaven. On Mount Sinai, Yahweh gave Moses the 10 Commandments, which became the basis of the 613 commandments of the Hebrew Torah.